Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to help educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality, disease-free years as possible. Thanks for joining me this week and another episode of By Design. We are at show number 93 today. Really can't believe that number, but yeah, this is my 93rd show. And it's our 13th episode of sort of taking apart the book Change Your Brain, Change Your Body by Dr. Amen. If you're keeping track of me here, today and next week's show, I'll conclude the book. I plan on wrapping this book up over the next 2 weeks. And I really hope it's been a blessing in your life to learn a little bit more about this 3-pound structure between your ears, which is the human brain. We talked about it being the greatest miracle, the greatest creation in the entire universe. Nothing in the universe can compare to the depth and intricacy of the human brain, and you possess one of them. So if you're listening to me right now and you're understanding my words, you have one of these structures that you've been blessed with by our Creator, and it's been designed for you. But it doesn't mean that just because you were given one that it does not require maintenance. When you buy a car, it requires maintenance. When you buy an appliance, they require maintenance. So, our bodies require maintenance, and the maintenance that our bodies requires us having a better understanding of how these body parts were designed and what God's intent was for us to maintain them. So whether it be our liver and keeping it detoxified, or our musculoskeletal system and keeping it strong, keeping it balanced and flexible, keeping it coordinated, that requires maintenance. Our nutritional or biochemistry, we are designed to eat a certain way. We are certainly not designed to eat man-designed food that I've taken apart for you over the weeks, the inflammatory foods. We are designed to eat anti-inflammatory foods, an abundance of fruits and vegetables, and a variety of other types of foods. And then we get into little intricacies of how my genetic code is a little bit different than yours. So there might be certain foods that I avoid, whereas you could eat. So when we talk about design, that word, when I wrote the name of my show, was very important to me because we have a designer. So therefore we have to maintain what the designer had in mind for us. So Luke 1:37, for with God nothing is impossible. We carry that Bible verse with us week after week because making change, this is show 13, part 13 of this book, which is entitled To Make Change, okay? How do we transform our lives, living a wellness lifestyle and establishing real life expectations? So today's subject matter is about negative thoughts. We control what we think. Our brain is empowered for thought. Nobody ever taught you how to think. It came with the design. You woke up one day and you had the ability to think and process information. So we want to not believe every negative thought that comes into our head, and managing those negative thoughts, which, by the way, if you haven't noticed in our society, there's an abundance of negative thinking that is designed for me to react in a certain way. Normally, it's a stressful response that they're looking for, one out of fear, for instance. So I buy a product. There are very, very intelligent people who design marketing, advertising, the stuff that we watch on TV, the stuff that we hear with our ears or see on a billboard. There are very, very intelligent people whose job it is to get us to respond emotionally so that we make that quick purchase, and also to utilize the type of thinking, right? This is the way our brains are wired, so that we respond in the way that they want us to respond to. So today we're going to talk about allowing the things that come into our head to be managed more effectively. And if we're better managers of the thoughts and information that's coming into our head, the better response we're going to have, which means that we're going to have a healthy response to information. We did shows on stress management, and we talked about the fight or flight reflex. Once again, our designer gave us this amazing fight or flight reflex. So but basically what that does is stimulate the production of adrenaline and other stress hormones like cortisol and cholesterol. So as we respond to inflammation, there's going to be a good or bad response to inflammation. So let's think about some of the negative thoughts that maybe you've experienced in your life. Here we go. I will never lose weight. I can't help being fat. My whole family is fat. Okay, it's my wife's fault I'm fat. She always puts too much food on my plate. Dieting is useless. I'm just going to gain it all back again. I'm a failure because I can't lose weight. I'm stressed out, so I have to eat. I have always had a sweet tooth. I'll never be able to stop eating chocolate. It's too hard to stick to a diet. My memory is terrible, but it's normal since I'm 45 years old. There's nothing I could do to prevent wrinkles. These are like just examples of things, and maybe you have your own baggage of things that enter your mind, negative thinking, things that are going to impact our response. But let's take it apart from a science perspective. Let's now say, well, what is this negative thinking, Proodian? Are you just which I'm not, a tree hugger, a granola crunching guy, and you want to think about the world in a positive light? I'm not naive to the fact that there are things going to enter our lives every day. I read a great Christian book called The Three Deceivers. I cannot recommend The Three Deceivers enough, especially for those of you who are in business out there. And, the way we process information, what our plans are for our life is very important. So no, using the body design and how were we designed, let's think about what naturally occurs to all of us in all of our years of education, right? We were never taught how to think, what to think, or what not to think. For many of us, it's basically like a free-for-all in our minds with random thoughts racing through, in and out of our brain, no rhyme, no reason. But many of us, we get stuck in the same repetitive negative thoughts and we can't get rid of them. And that's not healthy for our brain. Okay, it's not good for our bodies, because remember, our bodies are a direct reflection of how healthy our brain is. Our negative thinking has been taking control, over our brains, and we need to take back control. And this is going to empower our immune system. This is going to empower how we feel, and this is going to empower how we function. So, did you know that, your thoughts are so powerful that they can actually cause physical reactions in your brain and in your body? So, bad or mad or sad or hopeless or helpless thoughts, see, they release chemicals in the brain that make you feel bad. Your hands get cold. You sweat a little bit more, your heart starts to race a little bit more. And so this is associated with negative thinking and heart disease, okay? And it's not good for your health. So these awful, miserable, negative thoughts make your brain and your body work less effectively and efficiently. So it requires more energy to think negatively. And that has a direct physiological effect on the body. On the other hand, happy, positive, hopeful, loving thoughts. Now, happy, positive, hopeful, and loving. Now, I like to think of myself as a Christian man following Jesus. And when I think about Christ's words, when I read all those red words, in my Bible, there's a whole lot of hopeful, loving thoughts in there. And I think we have to relate to those. I think we have to start correlating our thinking that, did Jesus's words teach us to be these negative thinkers? And my answer to that is no. So these negative thoughts, see, what they do is they release really, really bad chemicals in your brain, all right? And the good ones, these hopeful, happy, positive thoughts release good, positive feeling chemicals. Your hands feel warmer, you sweat less, your heart rate slows down, okay? You feel better, your muscles are more relaxed, and this takes place in both your brain and your body. So that's the science behind, and it's a very partial science behind certain chemicals in our brain that are released during negative thinking, and also thoughts that are released during positive, healthy, loving thinking. And, focusing on negative, there's plenty of situations, where we can take something that's not so a positive and turn it into a positive. Okay, you hear people say, I hear it all the time in my practice, I lost 10 pounds, but I'm still not where I want to be, or I'm still a failure. And I sit there and say, man, well, you should say, wow, I lost 10 pounds, and the 10 pounds I lost, on the type of scale that we use, I could show a patient that it's real body fat. They're not losing muscle mass. They're not losing bone. You've heard me speak about body composition, because I'm not a scale guy. I'm a body composition guy. And when I look at the composition of the body, I'm sitting there and I'm encouraging the patient that you lost 10 pounds. Okay, maybe you need to lose another 10 pounds of body fat, but we should be encouraged that this is a step moving forward. You're making change. You're making transformation. This is a positive thing and a blessing. Okay, one of the biggest things that I find that is, I'm sure it's been part of human existence since the beginning of time, but labeling in my lifetime at 48 years old has become more of a problem than I've ever seen. Everybody seems to have a label or a title. We are all sort of put into these categories, and I have a problem with labeling. And if we find ourselves labeling people by just a couple of character traits, I find that to be a very negative way of living our life. So we got to be careful of that, as well as blaming others for our responsibility. You've listened to me over the last 93 shows talk about taking back our health, watching and following God's design. That requires us. That requires us doing the work and not blaming others for our failures. Failure is part of life, but failure also means that we need to pick ourselves up, reevaluate, and establish a new plan. And living a wellness lifestyle requires a plan. So when you feel mad, sad, nervous, or frustrated, we got to write those things down. Remember, our health journal is the key to our wellness lifestyle. Writing things down and looking at our lives from a wellness perspective, one that was designed by God, in this case, requires the type of thinking that we're doing, which is positive thinking that's loving, joyful. How do we surround ourselves with the ones that impact our lives the most? What are we writing down in our health journal? How do we keep those negative thoughts that are habitual in our brain? And what they're doing is constantly producing the wrong types of chemicals in our brain that we do not want as a normal part of daily living. Okay, so those negative thoughts make negative things happen, while positive thoughts help us reach our goals. Think of a successful athlete. You hear about people like Michael Jordan and such, they visualize the success of the game before they actually even go out and do it. That's harnessing the power of the human brain. And too often people just give it away. They don't want to work at that. So here are some action steps for you to harness the power of your brain every day, for better physical health. Clearly define what you want. When you think about yourself, well, you want more energy, you want to be stronger, you want to be leaner, let's say. Spend a few minutes every day kind of visualizing that and praying for that, as well as having it written down in a health journal so you could see it. Okay, if there is a picture of something that inspires you, this is also a positive way of thinking. And ask yourself every day if your behavior is getting you to your health goals. So your behavior, that means personal responsibility, personal accountability, and having the ability to learn, to be more literate in this subject matter, will then allow you to grow and develop into having positive thinking, which means we need to break bad behaviors, just like smoking. Smoking is a behavior. And those of you out there who have quit smoking, you had to, at some point in your life, change your thinking. For those of us who, my walk, for instance, I was relatively a sick, late teenage years. I was eating very badly. I didn't know anything about nutrition. I went and made change in my life and implemented a plan in my life to make change. So changing behavior requires us to have a stronger brain, to visualize what we want, and then to become knowledgeable to take action in that subject matter. And, the pendulum is really clear on this. If we follow a lifestyle physical, nutritionally, and psychologically, of God's design, that's going to allow our brain chemistry to have more joyful, loving thoughts. As a Christian, we're following a plan that has been very clearly laid out for us. And I find it fascinating sometimes, and yes, sometimes I need to use nutraceuticals and supplements to help stimulate brain tissue. Exercise, like we talked about a few weeks ago, is essential in stimulating brain tissue, and all of these are generally free things that God gave us to be utilized in our everyday life. For those of us who are married, being married brings with it so many joys that when I was single, I couldn't even understand what it was like to be married until I went through the experience. Having children, okay? These are all things in our lives to look at as a positive way and to reflect on every day. So this message today is really about getting our heads together in our health journal, writing down the negative thoughts that you feel are habitual, the ones that are constantly occurring every day in your life, and you have to work at and pray at removing those negative thoughts in your brain and replacing them with joyful experiences. All right. Well, you've been listening to the By Design radio program, and thanks for joining me, Dr. James Proodian, this week. If you would like any information about me, please go to ProodianHealthcare.com. You can submit any questions for the show, become a blog member at drproodian.com, and I really hope that your health journal is filling up with action steps and bullet points, and you're taking into account each week a tool that you could utilize to create a better wellness lifestyle in your own life, and you follow God's by design plan. Thanks for joining me, and have a blessed week.